Hello, I'm Tom O'Brien with the Center for International Trade and Transportation at California State University, Long Beach. Welcome to this special edition of Trade Talks. This edition is special for three reasons. To begin with, this is our first time back in the studio since 2019, and it's nice to be back in familiar surroundings. Second, this particular episode is co-sponsored by the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce. The HAIC was established in 1975 to be a collective voice and advocate for the harbor business community on issues related to trade, transportation, energy, and environmental and land use issues. The HAIC is also committed to workforce development, ensuring that the harbor community and the many businesses which serve it have a steady stream of talent. Here at CSULB, we are grateful for their support. Finally, it's always special when I get to sit down with Mario Cordero, the Executive Director of the Port of Long Beach. Mario and I last spoke on Trade Talks in 2018 when the world, including global trade, looked a little different than they do today. Please join me as we hear from someone who's been front and center in the supply chain's response to the pandemic on this special edition of Trade Talks. Hello, my name is Tom O'Brien, and welcome to this special episode of Trade Talks. My guest today is the Port of Long Beach Executive Director Mario Cordero, and this episode is sponsored by the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce. Mario Cordero has served as a member, Vice President, and President of the Long Beach Board of Harbor Commissioners beginning in 2003, before resigning to accept President Barack Obama's appointment to the Federal Maritime Commission in 2011. He served on the FMC until May 2017 and was chairman between April 2013 and January 2017. During his tenure as a Long Beach Harbor Commissioner, Mr. Cordero spearheaded the development of the pioneering Green Port Policy, which we're going to have a chance to talk a little bit about today. The policy has been nationally recognized and become a model for ports worldwide. And Mario also has a commitment to education. He's taught political science at Long Beach City College. And perhaps most important, Mario, you're a graduate of California State University, Long Beach. And so I'm thrilled to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here at my alumni here.
I want to start by talking a little bit about your perspective on the port's role in the pandemic response and help the audience understand what they're both seeing and experiencing firsthand. The supply chain, since the last time we talked, has gained a visibility that it perhaps hasn't experienced forever. So I think this time we can assume that the audience has a better understanding of what role the port plays in the global supply chain, and they should have a new appreciation for it. So what I'd like to talk about now is why the port and the supply chain in general are so important and why people are observing something different this time around.
Well, number one, Tom, I think it's fair to say that we're in a global crisis. And as it relates to the port industry, the disruption in the supply chain commenced with the trade war of the prior administration. As you know, here for the San Pedro Bay complex in the Port of Long Beach, we are the nation's largest port complex by far. And of course, our dependency on trade from Asia is paramount here, more specifically imports that we receive in a huge volume from China. So the trade war discussion, that geopolitical discussion then was followed by the health pandemic, COVID-19. So suffice to say that the visibility now on the nation's largest port complex is at a high level, going to the White House and of course the governor's office.
And so this evolution from sort of pre-pandemic changes and the health crisis have resulted in the delays that many consumers are experiencing, not only in Southern California or California, but the nation as a whole.
Not only the nation, but in the global community. I mean, we have disruption in Europe and China, and of course, you know, a lot of the containers from the ports of origin here in China, if there's one COVID-19 positive, in the workforce in these Chinese ports, they close down the terminal. So that's the impact of what COVID-19 is having in the global supply chain.
I think people would be surprised to hear, though, how actually the supply chain worked really well during the pandemic. They may not think it when they experience delays, but despite all of the challenges, the supply chain worked really well because we got goods, particularly the PPE and all of those things that were critical. What role did the port play in making sure that there was that connectivity between where goods are produced and where they're consumed, and keeping everybody safe in the process?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, number one, as you mentioned, we've kept the workforce safe. The men and women who have worked at the docks here in Southern California, the San Pedro Bay complex, they have worked in the supply chain from day one when the pandemic commenced, day in, day out. Some of the things that we did here at the Port of Long Beach is work with our mayor, Robert Garcia, and of course our Governor Newsom, to expedite vaccinations of these dock workers and people in the supply chain here at the San Pedro Bay complex. That was number one. But prior to that, the Port of Long Beach hosted a test site, which was very successful in testing upwards of 26,000 people in the complex. So these are some of the proactive measures we took early on. And as a result of that, we have a workforce that continues to work day in, day out. And of course, because most of them are vaccinated, it has mitigated some of the impacts from the ongoing COVID-19 and of course the Delta variant that's before us. And
is this an approach that was unique to Southern California? Were the problems more acute here? What made your response so effective?
Well, the problems were not unique to Southern California, but how we approached them were. So like I mentioned, we opened up a test site very early in the game. We made sure we had our workforce vaccinated. And for the Port of Long Beach, we allocated a staging area for containers because part of this is a capacity issue given the volumes of containers that we have. And right now that project that was initiated last year called the STORE project represents 64 acres of staging area for containers, both empties and loaded imports. This was a thinking out of the box moment for our staff at the Port of Long Beach. It's been very well received by our shippers. And of course, we're doing all we can to avoid delays. But bottom line, you mentioned the volume that we're moving here, 20 million, Tom, forecasted between the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach for year 2021. So in all fairness, we're doing pretty good moving that kind of cargo.
And those figures were projected for several years out, right? We're seeing volumes that we were thinking we were going to be seeing much later.
That's a great point. I mean, the forecast that was made, if you go back even 10 years, we're at that moment. What's different, no one predicted the health pandemic that we're in, the unprecedented pandemic that no one has ever lived through. So this is really, I think the cliche, crisis brings opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's brought an opportunity for us to discuss here, how do we make the supply chain more fluid, more efficient, and more predictable so that at the end of the day, the customers have their products not only on time, but again, in an efficient manner. So last I'll say, my first day at the Port of Speech here in 2018, when I was last here with you, it was a big year for the Port of Long Beach. We moved 8.1 million containers in 2018. And back then, before this crisis, I said we needed to have an Amazon state of mind, which basically means e-commerce and Amazon changed everything in this industry.
And you really can control that, right? You're reacting to factors that are outside of the port's control. How do you plan for something like that, or how do you anticipate what an Amazon state of mind means next year relative to this year?
Well, number one, we don't run the terminals. We're a landlord-tenant operation here, so we're the landlord. But I think it's fair to say that people will tell you that in the last few years, going back to the Greenport policy of 2005, we decided we're not just a landlord, we're going to have a voice at the table in terms of how we move and how we collaborate with our stakeholders, be it the marine terminal operators, the truckers, the carriers. So it's a full court press in terms of what we've been able to do to have constructive, collaborative discussions to address the challenges of the day.
It seems that the pandemic revealed more than anything the need for that type of collaboration, because this is a supply chain challenge. It's not just a challenge at the ports. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think what this pandemic did is basically say, look, you knew you were going to have 20 million containers moving through this complex at some point. Now it's the time to really address these issues, and I think we've come a long way here in this complex, and also with our elected officials of really honing in on this issue in terms of how we make the nation's largest port complex more efficient, more competitive, because at the end of the day, this gateway is the more strategic and significant gateway to the United States, given our proximity to the Trans-Pacific trade route, the most important trade route for this country, and of course, the region of Asia.
I want to talk a little bit about, because you mentioned it, the Green Port policy. One of the things that is important, I think, to mention is that despite this surge in volume and the work that the ports and the entire supply chain has done, you have not sacrificed the sustainability goals that were established under the Green Port policy. And I'm curious how the port responds to this rapidly changing consumer demand, unanticipated, unprecedented, while keeping an eye on the environmental goals.
Well, that's one of the challenges. I mean, this Amazon state of mind, the consumer expects her products tomorrow. E-commerce has grown 14 to 15% in this crisis. So I think going back to the Green Port policy, the Port of Long Beach was way ahead, and in fact was a leader in sustainable development. That's what essentially that proved, and we have a resume of being successful. So for us, it's very welcome to have the administration, the Biden administration, has put all emphasis as a priority of equity and sustainable issues with regard to this industry, and we should be at the front of the line when it comes to projected government funding, because we have proven that we've done sustainable development and been very much of an environmental steward. So for us, it's not about what we're going to promise, it's about what we have already done.
And this is wide-ranging, right? It's everything from marine biology to, access to trucks at the ports. And can you talk a little bit about how the port develops its goals with all of these different partners at play?
Well, number one, I think we work with not only our regulatory agencies, but our stakeholders, be it truckers, marine terminal operators, and of course, neighborhood and communities. I think this has been an effort, it's been a joint effort, and of course the City of Long Beach, we certainly appreciate the leadership we've had here at the City of Long Beach for many years on these issues, and more specifically today, Mayor Robert Garcia. And I think for Long Beach, again, we're a city of less than 494,000 people. So for such a small city, population-wise, comparatively speaking, think of what we've been able to do in terms of making sure that we guarantee movement not only of cargo here for the City of Long Beach, but for the region to the country, and again, in a sustainable fashion and environmental conscious manner.
And where do you see the port's influence in other parts of the state or maybe in other ports around the country? Do you get questions about the policies that you're developing and what it takes to accomplish it? Because you really have taken a leadership role in this.
We've had tremendous influence in the port industry. After the 2005 formal application of the Green Port policy, we were invited, and me specifically back then as a commissioner, at many of forums to discuss this Green Port policy. What does this mean? And of course, we've now shown the world what it does mean, whether it's working with our community and our neighborhoods and our city, but more specifically, reducing emissions from port operations. The greatest story of that Green Port policy, Tom, is again leading to our collaboration with the Port of LA. We have reduced truck emissions here in this complex at the tune, particulate matter, at the tune from 88 to 90%. You remember, and people here in Long Beach remember the dilapidated black smoking trucks on the 710 corridor back in 2004, 2003. You don't see that anymore, but we still got a long way to go. Our aim now is not about reducing emissions, it's about eliminating emissions. So our goal now is zero emissions.
I want to turn our attention a little bit now toward the future. We've talked about the impact that the pandemic has had, but there were already broader changes in the economy at play before. You alluded to those earlier. Includes the rapid rise of e-commerce. Can you share a little bit your perspective on what changes you may have already been preparing for before, and what may be on the horizon that we're not quite sure about yet?
Sure. My first speech in this position as Executive Director of Port of Long Beach, the state of the port, was in January of 2018. And I said then that we needed to consider a 24/7 vision. Why? Because I knew what the forecast was. I didn't predict that we were going to have a health pandemic, but I knew that going forward, this complex was going to continue to lead in terms of being a very strategic gateway with the volumes of consumer demand here in containers. So I think at this point for the future, I think one of the things that, again, I'm very pleased that both in Washington and Sacramento, they now realize that at the nation's port complex, when you move 20 million containers, we cannot move with the models of yesterday. So the model of the future is 24/7. Now, it's a stepping stone approach to this, so it's not going to be anytime soon, and it's not going to be easy. But yesterday, the Port of Long Beach announced that we have a partnership with one of our terminals, a pilot project for extended gates, as a stepping stone to 24/7. So that's the next vision of what I predict eventually at some point will happen in this complex.
Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Are we talking about extended evening hours, weekend hours, or is that yet to be determined?
Yeah, extended hours. I mean, 24/7 basically means 24 hours a day for 7 days a week. Now, I'll be the first to admit that's not going to happen anytime soon. But let's say the discussion in terms of a compromise vision is already 16/5. For 5 days a week, have 16 hours of predictable gate operations. Now, I want to make clear, the answer is not just with the marine terminal operators here at the Port of Long Beach. It has to be throughout the supply chain. Whether you're a trucker, whether you're a warehouse, a railroad, we need that domino effect, which I predict will happen in time, of how we move the commerce in the most important gateway of this nation.
And it sounds like that's an important step to give the entire supply chain some breathing room, right, to get started.
And I think what this health pandemic really raised to our attention is now critical for us to take those bold steps for the future.
And again, the port taking a leadership role, given your prominence in the regional supply chain, in the national supply chain.
Well, I don't know about whether or not the prominence has helped, but I think all credit has to also go to the stakeholders. And we have a great staff at the Port of Long Beach, and our commission, who continues to lead in some of these futuristic visions, whether it's the Green Port Policy back in 2005 or now in 2021, 24/7 vision.
Yeah, and I think despite the fact that our viewers may be seeing the supply chain in action more than they ever have, I think they would be surprised at the complexity behind it.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly front and center now. I said we've gotten the attention of the White House, who appointed John Bacardi as an envoy to address this issue. But with that, let me leave by saying that consumers are 24/7. We talked about e-commerce, online purchasing. So consumers can now buy products at 10 p.m. or 4 in the morning. And one of the things that we have seen, that the United States has been very fortunate now in having a vibrant economy or trajectory upwards as compared to other economies in the world, and that's the reason we have this volume demand, which is the consumer demand. So again, it's at all levels. So the good news is we have a good economy, and it's getting better. So we need to get prepared again to handle this kind of volume in the future. And like I said, we need to think out of the box and start changing models of operation in order to do that.
Well, I think good news is a good place to take a break. We will come back and talk a little bit more about what you see in the future ahead, 2022 and beyond. For now, this is Trade Talks. I'm Tom O'Brien. We'll be right back.
Go to that.
I don't remember how it started. Our back and forth. Victory. Fumble. Repeat. It always came back.
Okay, here we go, throw it!
Yeah.
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Nice.
Welcome back to Trade Talks. a special edition sponsored by the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce. I'm Tom O'Brien, and my very special guest today is Mario Cordero, the Executive Director of the Port of Long Beach. And before the break, Mario, we were talking a little bit about what the global supply chain has been experiencing in the wake of the pandemic, and we started a discussion of what to look forward to in 2022 and beyond. And so we left off talking about the fact that the supply chain is experiencing challenges across the board, not only at ports, but in warehousing and trucking and rail. There are even equipment shortages. What else can we do to get some breathing room so that we can solve the broader system-wide challenges, things that implement change over the longer term?
Well, first of all, we're very fortunate that we have an administration now that has the ports on the radar in terms of infrastructure funding. So the continued investment in infrastructure, more specifically rail, I think the future for me is absolutely rail here for the Port of Long Beach. And the reason is because look at the freeways. We have to deal with this issue of congestion, not only with regard to within the port, but also the corridors. So trucking is always going to be a part of the component. But for us, our goal is to make sure that the equation here now moves on the rail side. So for that reason, the Port of Long Beach, our Harbor Commission, has authorized a budget of about $1.6 billion in the next 10 years to be invested in rail. So again, the more we get on dock rail and get these containers out of the harbor district by rail, that's the future.
And 10 years is a long time horizon, right? What do we do between now and then to make sure that we're still moving the containers off the docks successfully and efficiently?
Well, one of the important things is that we have extended gate hours and make sure that those are certain and reliable. And I think that will create fluidity in how we move the containers. Now again, it signals that in the supply chain, the truckers have to be there. And of course, the warehouses have to be open. And the distribution centers have to be part of this commentary. So those are exactly what we're working on right now, because I think that's what we need to do.
Full disclosure, you and I were both part of a recent effort that looked at convening all of these stakeholders that you've been talking about: the ports, rail, trucking, warehousing, community, and the consumers. Could you talk a little bit about why the port felt it important to be part of this effort and what you hope to accomplish, and why bringing all of the stakeholders together in one room at the same time is so necessary?
Well, I think the crisis has brought us together. And I think what's going to be unique about this situation is that, again, crisis brings opportunity. So there's a tremendous opportunity for us to collaborate and work together to, think out of the box in terms of how we change things here, whether it's gate hours, and eliminate dwell time. Right now we have about 68 vessels that anchor in the harbor district. Unprecedented, historic. And to put that in the proper context, Tom, the highest number of vessels that anchor we ever had was 40 back in February. So what is it in normal times? 0, maybe 1 or 2. So it gives you the crisis that we're in, not only with regard to this health pandemic, but the impacts of what that has been. So I think when we start talking about extended gate hours and what our vision, when I said 24/7 back in 2018, people had the same reaction as to when I stated about the Green Port policy in 2004. It was not well received. It was futuristic at best. But I think history proves that Long Beach is not wrong when we have a vision. And I think what I'm looking forward to is that there's a lot of energy right now of stakeholders responding not only to our government officials, both in Washington and Sacramento, but to the consumers. Because at the end of the day, things have changed now in terms of the consumer expectation. So in that regard, we're going to continue to exercise every avenue, every opportunity available to make sure that we further this Amazon state of mind of moving containers. It's about cargo velocity, so we don't talk about cargo volatility.
And that's a good distinction, and I think we're seeing pressure from the consumer, as you said, to sort of make sure that the containers are delivered. Does that translate into sort of a national imperative to elevate freight as a topic of discussion in a way that it hasn't been before? I know that from the work we do in education, we sort of see 50 different freight policies around the country. Is this an opportunity for us to demonstrate the importance of freight to this nation's economy as a whole?
Absolutely. The opportunity here is for the United States to finally move forward a national freight policy. And let me tell you why that's such important. You know, during this pandemic, what the Port of Long Beach has done because of our $4 billion billion investment in the last 10 years, it was a very opportune time to finally put closure and open one of our two greatest capital improvement endeavors. The new bridge, soon to be called the Long Beach International Gateway, a $1.5 billion investment, and the state-of-the-art terminal. That's another $1.7 billion investment. What a great time to have done this. I mean, despite the volume and the surges, you don't see any congestion on our new bridge because we've expanded the lanes. We've had emergency lanes added to that. So I think the point being here is the opportunity again to continue to meet these challenges and lead in terms of what the kind of infrastructure that we do need here. And again, keep in mind that the American consumer has continued to have growth in consumer spending, and the folks in the retail sector will tell you that the expectation of retail sales growth for this year is anywhere between 11 to 15%. And again, our economy is on a very positive trajectory. GDP growth year to year, somewhere around 6%, could be 6.3. But the good news for 2022, that economic growth now is projected to have further growth for year 2022, given that we assume we're going to at some point be able to control the virus, not only COVID-19, but the Delta variant.
You referenced operational strategies. You talked about the infrastructure, state of the art, and I can attest it's a beautiful bridge. What else does state of the art look like moving forward? Are you looking at technology-based solutions, other operational changes, other infrastructure improvements? You mentioned rail, of course, that are going to be part of the solution moving forward?
Yes. So when we talk about infrastructure, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is brick and mortar kind of projects. But today's a new day. It's about digital transformation. And I think in terms of technology, in terms of furthering visibility, furthering transparency and efficiency, I think what we're working on, in addition with our terminals, the use of technology, again, to sort of, again, with our stakeholders, have more visibility, and our ultimate customer, the beneficial cargo owner, they need to know not only where the location of their container is, but when are they going to get it? So I think these are some of the promising things that are happening in the horizon. That is the implementation of technology here, so that again, we get ready for the fifth industrial revolution, which is scheduled to commence in 2030, right?
Yeah, you make a very good point. I mean, as consumers, we've become very accustomed to tracking our packages once they're on a truck. And the notion that we might be able to do that when that good is on a container at sea would be revolutionary.
Exactly. I mean, just to put that in some more context, I'll be honest, I never shopped online before this whole pandemic. And my wife, Gloria, has gotten very good at it. You know, it's very convenient. So the younger generation has taught us something. You know, there's ways to be more efficient. You don't have to go to a brick and mortar place or a destination or venue. And like I said, you can sit back and shop at 10 p.m. And I think it's probably a little bit facetiously to say the consumer has been addicted because there's a lot of purchasing going. So I want to make sure to the consumers who are listening, start shopping early for Christmas because there's a lot of demand and you don't want to get caught short come for those late Christmas shoppers like myself. Certainly, I'm not going to wait till weeks before Christmas to do my Christmas shopping. The advice, start doing it now.
It's a good point. Although it might be a good excuse, right? if you're too late.
Sure.
What are the risks of doing nothing? I mean, there are some who would argue that maybe we shop too much, maybe there are too many goods, but does that solve the problem?
Well, no, it doesn't. Because again, number one, the risk of doing nothing is what we have today. And let's put this again in what we have, 20 million containers. We knew we were going to have that kind of volume at some point. What we didn't know, that was a health pandemic was going to precipitate this. So I think going forward, the risks of saying that we can't afford to do this, and let me give you a good example. The whole debate about extended gauge, using what we call the hoot shift. And that hoot shift is the men and women on the docks who work from 3 to 8 in the morning. Okay, we don't do that here. And because it's costly, it's a financial risk. But I think that's a good example of what I'm trying to portray here. What is the risk of doing nothing? You know what the risk is? Impact to our monetary policy. One of the major factors that the Federal Reserve Board is talking about in terms of inflationary factors? Shipping, transportation costs. And I think when it gets to the Federal Reserve Board, that's an issue that they're looking at in terms of the transitory inflationary policy and the monetary policy. That's an eye-opener. So for those of us who are in the shipping and transportation industry, we need to take note of that and make sure that the time for debate is over. The time for implementation is now.
Yeah, and it's a really good and interesting point in that the stakeholders in this, the people who have a stake, are now, I think, much more broadly perceived than they were before the pandemic. The full integration of trade with monetary policy, the relationship between commerce and trade and the environment is all is all front and center, as we've been saying. Is this the legacy of the pandemic, sort of a new framework for freight planning, for integrated uses of technology, of policy framework, of monetary policy? Is this where we're going to see the greatest impact of the pandemic in how we plan for freight moving forward?
Well, it's fair to say that the pandemic has brought an inflection point on this question. And that is, again, we have not only 20 million containers coming in forecasted for this year, but I think what this crisis has done, aside from the negative health impacts for those of us, or many of us, or people who have had friends and loved ones succumb to this or seriously ill, but this is a wake-up call to us. And that wake-up call is, again, we need to change how we operate here. So putting it on a more everyday, day-to-day kind of observation, I don't think there's anybody in Long Beach who has not been impacted in terms of the shipping transportation question. Talk to your neighbor who's ordered a dishwasher, a bicycle, outside furniture. It's unbelievable how much time it's taken for that product to get here. And I think the American consumer at some point is going to run out of patience. They don't want to wait 3 months to get an appliance, or 4 or 5 months to get a bicycle. Things have to change. So I think what the pandemic has brought to us is that inflection point that for us to realize what we realized all along. This kind of volume, we need changes. And the change is going to be a model of operations that differs from what we were accustomed to previously.
And you touched upon this earlier, but you really rely upon government partners locally in Sacramento and in Washington as well to sort of be on the same page with that. And by all accounts, you're seeing that happening. Is that fair?
Clearly, I think the best example is, I think for those of us in Long Beach, I think we should all be proud that we hosted yesterday a summit that was unprecedented. Unprecedented because participating in this summit was the White House by way of the port-appointed envoy, Mr. John Bakari, and Dee Dee Myers, senior advisor to the governor on these issues and director of business and development, GoBiz, and 3 or 4 leaders of the very pertinent agencies, whether it's the transportation agency, food and agriculture, and of course the list goes on. To have a summit where everybody's there in one room saying, we need to figure this out, not just identify the issues that we've identified in years past, but identify the solutions. So it's a historic moment for the Port of Long Beach, it's a historic moment for the San Pedro Bay complex, and it's a historic moment for the country in terms of how we now chime in on transportation and shipping in the same way that Dwight Eisenhower chimed in, that ultimately led, President Eisenhower ultimately led for 1956 the most historic infrastructure endeavor that this country had made. And this administration hopefully now could move to that second step of investing in transportation and infrastructure.
And I know you've traveled the world looking at other port complexes.
Yeah.
Does this put us in a position now to be more competitive, to maintain our competitiveness as a trading nation, given sort of a laser focus now on some of these issues?
No question, because for those who question the 24/7 model, it's not a new model. In my travels to Asia, Asia is 24/7. In fact, when you have part of our problem about having ships at anchor, these imports are coming in volumes from factories and ports who work around the clock. And so what happens when you get to the United States? Aside from the reasons I mentioned as to why we had the backlog, there is a part of this that when they come here, we don't have that day-night mentality in terms of how we move cargo. But that's going to change.
And this is an impact, I think, that is going to require adjustment not only from the supply chain operators, but also maybe from the consumers as well. Will consumers have to expect a transition phase to getting to full 24/7? Are they going to have to manage their expectations a little bit as we adjust to the backlog?
Yes, I think that's fair to say. I mean, I think one of the things that you're seeing now is that the cost of this transportation and shipping, which for most of the pandemic period was bared by the retailers and the manufacturers, that cost you're going to start seeing, if it hasn't already, now being passed down to the consumer. So everybody has skin in the game here, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a marine terminal operator, but every stakeholder in the supply chain, as we should, including port authorities who have to lead in this conversation.
So part of it is managing expectations, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to manage those expectations. I mean, 24/7 is a good example. I've never said 24/7 is going to happen overnight. I never said 24/7 would be a short-term expectations. But in terms of how you put that in the proper context, it's certainly a long-term. In fact, today, based on yesterday's conversation, it's fair to say it's a midterm expectation. But the steps that we take to that, and I think the more progress we made, as an example, if we go 16/5, 16 hours a day for 5 days a week, guaranteed, rain or shine, I think our customer would appreciate that, and ultimately the American consumer will see that they don't have to wait months and months for their appliance.
Yeah, my sense is that it's more about predictability, and people can adjust knowing that if it's not going to be here today, but for certain it will be here tomorrow. People can live with that.
I think in any industry, if you give people certainty, they'll live with that. They'll appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, this is a good time to take a break, Mario.
Okay.
When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how we message the importance of the supply chain and the work that the port does. I'm Tom O'Brien. This is Trade Talks. We'll be right back.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day, I found out I have something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
Welcome back to Trade Talks. I'm Tom O'Brien, and my special guest is Mario Cordero, the Executive Director of the Port of Long Beach. Mario, at the close of the previous segment, you talked about the role that the public sector partners can play in helping the port and the supply chain. And recognizing that the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce helped bring us together today, they're a co-sponsor, and that they have an interest in making sure that the voice of the harbor community is heard on a wide range of topics. I'd like to shift now and talk a little bit about communicating the importance of the trade sector to the community. The port's in an interesting position. You have responsibility to the community as a department of city government, but you also have tenants. You mentioned that you're a landlord, right, whose needs you have to respond to. How do you balance those two roles? Can't be easy.
Well, it is not easy, but for the Port of Long Beach, we've been able to do that. I mean, today, one of the concepts that's widely spoken about is ESG at every corporate level, environmental social governance.
Right.
Essentially, Long Beach did that back in 2005, or started that, and we've been doing that. So I think if you go back to what we've been able to accomplish, I remember when I was on the commission, when Beverly O'Neill appointed me back in 2003, there were two things about the Port of Long Beach for citizens of Long Beach. One, most people didn't even know about the Port of Long Beach. Two, what you did know what you did know about the port, it was a polluter. I think definitely those times have changed. I think we had a very proactive community engagement, which including not only educating people about the importance of the port, not just in Long Beach, but for the state of California. So where we're at today, when we look at this health pandemic, I think it's fair to say that the workers in this complex now are considered essential workers. I say that because one of the successful aspects of that vaccination campaign was we made the argument to Governor Newsom that these workers were essential, and they are. So I think, right now what you're probably hearing, I just got a call this morning from someone who lives in Newport Beach. Why are these containers outside my view here on the coast? So the spotlight's on us. But I think on a more serious conversation about this, these are essential workers. And I think, again, when you get the attention of the White House, an administration who now says, we want some solutions here, that tells you something about now where this conversation's at and the reason why this port complex is so important. I earlier talked about the need for a national freight policy. If we had that, Tom, I could guarantee you that based on a policy like that, the first thing you're going to identify is what are these significant corridors, the significant ports. I would foresee that a policy like that would probably put LA Long Beach #1 on the list. Yeah. Just like we do in infrastructure projects. The new bridge that we just built, replacing the Gerald Desmond Bridge, was a project of national significance when it came to funding from the federal government.
Yeah, I think you're right. When people think about the supply chain these days, it's no longer an abstract concept, right? It's a bridge, it's a vessel, it's a lifeline to PPE or other products that have been needed to survive the pandemic.
Absolutely.
For many harbor-related and supporting businesses, one of the challenges, though, is the complex nature of the policy and regulatory environment. That still remains a little complex. I'm sure you've heard this not only as a port director, but as a former commissioner and as a chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission. What advice do you have about how best to tell the story of the supply chain and industry to government partners? What's most important for the regulatory agencies to know?
Come visit the port. I mean, one of the challenges is, well, the good news is we have a goal of zero emission. What other industry expressed a goal that we did back in November 2017, that we were going to be zero emission, not only in cargo handling equipment by 2030, but in trucking in 2035. That is environmental stewardship. The expectation, though, is now people would like us to be zero emission next year.
Yeah.
So I think, again, it does bring about high expectations, and I think based on, as to your question, come visit the Port of Long Beach. We talked about air quality. It's not perfect. We have a long ways to go, but it's much different than what it was even 10 years ago. Talk about water quality, marine life in the harbor. Again, this has been a full court press for Long Beach as part of our response to the neighborhoods and communities with regard to the environmental concerns. So, and in terms of visiting the complex, see what we spend our money on. The state-of-the-art terminal and what that has led to, the bridge, and other projects that we've done in the Harbor District. And last, the contribution that we've had in terms of with our funding to community grants. I mean, that's a huge story. Millions of dollars into the nonprofits of Port Long Beach, as where it should be. Because I remember, Tom, back when I was a commissioner, and I was asked by the Press Telegram, you know, back in 2003, what do you hope to accomplish? And what I remember the answer. I said, well, look, this port should not benefit just a few. It should benefit the many. And what I meant, and what we've been able to do and prove, is people of Long Beach had to be the beneficiaries of this multi-billion-dollar industry. Neighborhoods, nonprofits, schools, we've done that, and we have led in that area of ESG.
Well, and I can certainly attest to that, the importance of education to the mission of the port, and your commitment through personnel and programming as well as dollars has certainly benefited the community. I do want to sort of revisit one point you just made about the transition to the zero emissions, which is clearly a position that puts California at the forefront in the nation and globally in some cases. Do you have any concern about sort of the message coming from that being that California is not competitive or is not business friendly, or sort of doesn't want the trade to come here?
Well, my only response to that is California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And the reason we're the 5th largest economy is not just because of Silicon Valley. I think international trade has a lot to do with this. So I think the jobs that had come from this operation in the ports speaks for itself. And again, simply stated, California is the 5th largest economy in the world. So what does that mean in the United States? We're not only leaders in terms of vision when it comes to environmental climate change issues, but also in terms of business practices. Because look at our GDP for this state, it's upwards of what, 3.1 trillion. So I think that speaks for itself.
And one of the issues in terms of remaining competitiveness is workforce capacity, and I know that's central to the mission of the port and also a personal interest to you. How do we make sure that the port workforce, the supply chain workforce, is ready for whatever challenges are coming ahead? I mean, the most prominent perhaps is everyone talks about the lack of truck drivers, right? We need truck drivers. But it's more than that, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think for the Port of Long Beach, recently there's 2 fronts that we have addressed. Number one, our partnership with the Port of Los Angeles to explore a training center for the men and women who work on the docks in terms of those future jobs. And crane operators, skilled labor. We need a training center in this complex. So workforce development is a very prioritized topic here. So I appreciate our collaboration with the Port of Los Angeles on this issue. Number 2, what we do with the educational institutions. Our latest endeavor here for the Port of Long Beach is, again, to have partnerships with Long Beach Unified School District, not just in logistic jobs, but what are the jobs of the future? So we've elevated our partnership with Jordan High School to now talk about a STEMS program, because in the future, what we need from the young generation here, particularly the generation of people of color who are not subject to these type of professional fields, we need more engineers. We need the future generation to be not only equipped with those type of skill sets, but with technology overall. So those are 2 things that the Port of Long Beach has emphasized here in terms of our issue as it relates to workforce development. How do we develop the present workforce, but prepare the future workforce?
Well, and as an educator, I imagine you think a lot about new ways of learning as well as new ways of working, and they need to meet in the middle somewhere. So it's important for us as educational institutions to be responsive to those changes, the broader changes in the economy. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Since we seem to be meeting every 2 years, can you look into your crystal ball a little bit and tell me what you think the supply chain looks like when we next meet in 2023, if that's when it is?
Well, we'll have cleaner trucks. We're taking those steps. Right now, the technology that's available to us is near zero, which is low NOx LNG trucks. It's there now. So for the Port of Long Beach, we need to reduce emissions now and not wait for zero emission. And as we go 2 years in the future, I think you're going to have a continued evolvement of the zero technology, that is electric trucks, that are going to be more present, maybe not in the numbers that most people think, but there's going to be a lot of progress on that end. Another issue is our continued investment in rail. As I indicated before, one of our next grand endeavor is the Pier B Rail Enhancement Facility. That's going to be a game changer in terms of how rail operations are in this complex. And I think those are a couple items that come to mind in terms of what the future is for the Port of Long Beach. And last, again, now implementing this Amazon state of mind that I'm talking about, which includes a 24/7 vision, continuing extending gate hours, because that 20 million volume that we are now going to expect here for 2021 for the San Pedro Bay complex, it's not going to get any less.
How much more will it get? Are the projections already shifting? Are we talking, 25 million down the road, or are we not there?
Certainly by 2030, you're definitely talking about in excess of 25 million. More specifically, maybe 27 million TEUs. And even by mid-decade, 2025, you're approaching 24. So it's an opportunity for us now to roll up our sleeves and get ready for that. And I'm confident that we will be able to do that. And I think the future looks good, not only in terms in the short term in regard to the economy, but again, responding to our ultimate customer, the beneficial cargo owners, and of course, our American consumer.
And will we still be talking about the pandemic and its legacy and impact on the supply chain?
They'll be talking about this pandemic, I predict, in the decades to come, because the impact it had to the global community in all sectors is going to be something that will be a conversation, not only in terms of what those impacts were, but what we do as a nation in preparation for whatever that next crisis brings us.
And in terms of collaboration with other ports, other nations, what's on your docket when you travel overseas next to sort of talk about what the port is going to be doing next and how you can better understand what your trading partners are going to be doing?
Well, every region is different in terms of port authorities, in terms of how they operate and the commodities that move through their ports. But one of the major conversations today when it comes to our collaboration with other port authorities around the world is on the issue of climate change. How do we better, as stakeholders, as port authorities, continue to implement change and a positive impact on the whole question of climate change? And that topic is a very vigorous conversation. There's a lot of buy-in, whether it's in China, whether it's the United States. So that's a major issue that continues to play in a very positive sense.
And one I assume that depends upon collaboration, which is where we started this conversation with not only industry, but partners at regional, state, and local government, as well as the federal government as well. Yeah,
I mentioned if you go back to our reductions in emissions, 88% in particulate matter, NOx at the tune of 59%, and SOx at the tune of 97%. All this would not have been accomplished if, in fact, we didn't have collaboration with everybody in the supply chain, the truckers, the marine terminal operators, and of course the port authority. So, a lot has been said about what we need to do to further reduce emissions, but I could tell you for a fact, what our marine terminals have invested in this conversation has been significant amounts. So there's not a terminal out there that has pushed back and said, we're not going to do anything. So the good story for San Pedro Bay Complex, which includes the Port of LA, is that we have a very vigorous and vibrant stakeholder network here, that we've accomplished some good things, and we will continue to think out of the box here.
And for our audience, which is both local and beyond, what's your concluding message that you want them to know, maybe something you haven't shared about the work that you're doing at the port and what it means for all of them as consumers?
Well, it means everything, because when we talk about international trade, it starts at the port. So whether you're a farmer, whether you're a consumer, a manufacturer, everything comes in through your port. So we have a lot of important gateways in the United States, and I think what everybody is realizing is how important that is, because when there's obstruction or at least disruption in supply chain, we're front page. I mean, look where we're at right now with the kind of summit we had yesterday. All the interest, not only in the local networking of leaders and stakeholders, but in Washington and Sacramento. And we're not just meeting here to solve the problems of Long Beach. We're meeting here to have solutions for the entire supply chain, because let us not forget that Long Beach, Los Angeles, 40% of the nation's imports come through this gateway. And these containers go as far east as hubs like Chicago, Kansas City, as far east as Atlanta, Memphis. So no matter where you are in the United States, if you remember, Tom, the Alameda Corridor did a study back in 2006, if I recall, or 2007. Based on that study, there's not one congressional district in mainland United States that cannot say they received a container from this complex.
And I'm assuming that that's a message that that the harbor community is interested in making sure it gets out as well. That's the impact. Well, Mario, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you for a fascinating discussion, and I hope you'll come back before another 2 years.
Absolutely.
If we can, to check in, and we can see how accurate your predictions are. And I also want to thank you, the audience, for being part of the discussion today. And I hope you'll join us around the negotiating table the next time we gather for Trade Talks. Thank you. I'm Tom O'Brien. Thank you for joining us for this very special episode of Trade Talks. My thanks to our guest, Mario Cordero, Executive Director of the Port of Long Beach, and our sponsors, the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce. You'll find more information about HAIC's work and the ways you can become engaged in all of its programs, including its policy, professional development, and education-related programs at the link below.